Hey everyone, today I'm going to be showing you how you could build your own Don't Hug Me I'm Scared Duck Guy puppet replica for around $10. Today we are going to be building just the head, which is really the most difficult part because a lot of the rest of the puppet is pretty self-explanatory. If you don't know what Don't Hug Me I'm Scared is, I highly recommend that you go check it out. It's one of my favorite web series of all time, and there's probably a pretty good chance that you've maybe already seen the first episode. So now we'll get right into it with the supplies you'll need to build the puppet. So if you live in the US at least, you'll be able to get all of this stuff for fairly cheap from stores like Walmart or Dollar Tree. So the first most obvious thing that you're going to need for the puppet is fabric. You're going to want at least a yard of this fake fur fabric, which will cost you about $4 at Walmart, and 4 sheets of felt. And now, as you may have already noticed, I didn't stick to the traditional colors of the duck guy from Don't Hug Me I'm Scared. Now, this is really just because it was more convenient for me to use these colors since I had leftover materials from duck. Also, I figured it didn't really affect the functionality of the build or the look too severely. Although if you do want your puppet to look more spot on to the original, what you will need is green fur, of course, for the head, a pale yellow color for the beak, burgundy for inside the mouth, white for the eyes, black for the pupils, and a light pinkish red for the tongue. The next thing that you will need is a styrofoam cone that you could use to carve into the shape of the beak. You will also need at least 2 small styrofoam balls that you will be able to use as the eyes of the puppet. You'll also need at least a couple cups of flour and some scrap paper that you'll use to paper mache the shape of the head, as well as a few hot glue sticks to stick everything together. Another thing that you may want but isn't necessary is this Elmer's spray adhesive. You really can do every step that requires it just by using hot glue, but this will make your experience a lot easier. The last thing that you will need is one of these cheap rubber balls that you could find at pretty much any dollar store or superstore. This will be used to make the paper mache head, and it's convenient because you could pop it and pull it out once the head is hardened and dried. The tools that you're going to need are scissors, a hot glue gun, and optionally a pair of clippers. These are not necessary by any means, but they sure do make the trimming of the fur go 10 times faster. So altogether, my calculated price of this project is $13.80, but it'll probably be quite a bit cheaper for you since there's a good chance that you already have all of the materials for it at home. So the first step for actually building the puppet is to make the paper mache mold for the head. You're going to do this by just paper macheing around the rubber ball as you normally would paper mache anything. I didn't include this part into the video, for one, because I already had one made, and also because there's nothing really special about the paper mache that you do for this puppet compared to other paper maches. After you've done that, the next step is to cut a slightly smaller hole into the front of the paper mache for where the beak is going to go. If you want to carve the shape of the beak first before you do this, it does help a little, but you have to make sure to cut the hole before you put the fur on the head. So now on to attaching the fur, or as we see it, the feathers. You're going to want to lay your fur into the center of the fabric and make sure that it wraps around and connects from both angles. This way you can ensure that your fabric will uncover the entire head and that you won't come up short. In this next step, I am completely covering my paper mache head with the spray adhesive to attach the fabric. If you're choosing to use hot glue instead, in this step, just cover it in a generous amount. Be sure that you place the beak hole down because this will ensure that the face of your puppet will be free of seams, creases, or wrinkles. This next part, in my opinion, is the most difficult part of the whole project. I'm going to be linking a video in the description made by the Clothespin Puppets YouTube channel that really well explains how to put fabric around a ball. It's really a lot harder to see with this furrier fabric, but essentially what I'm doing is pinching it around the ball and making 4 fins. After I stick the fabric on and hold it for a bit till it dries, I go back through with a hot glue gun, connecting the seams in place to the ball. This way there won't be any large gaps revealing down to the paper mache once we cut the fins off. So after you've cut all the seams off, you should be left with a fabric-covered ball like this. The nice thing about working with the furry material is that, unlike felt, it's really forgiving even if you do a sloppy job on the seams, since the fur tends to cover up a lot of the visibility. So the next part of the process is the trimming of the fur, which is the most tedious part. You could use scissors or clippers, but if you do choose to use clippers, make sure that you do not have the guard attached. The technique with using the clippers is to hover above the actual surface while you're doing your trimming. Make sure that you start a little long just for safe measure, and make sure that you don't actually touch the clippers to the fabric and that you're just floating and cutting the hair. And if you're going to be doing this part with scissors instead, the technique is pretty similar. Just don't cut it too close and work with what looks good as you go. It's good to have some reference pictures pulled up so you could get it exactly how you want it to look. The next step is to carve the styrofoam cone into the beak. Cut the cone perfectly in half with a knife so you have two equal sides. And for actually cutting the shape of the cone, there's really no special way of doing this. Just make sure that your knife is sharp and you have some reference pictures pulled up and ready. From what I could tell, there are 3 different shapes for the beak throughout all 6 episodes of Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared. The 3 different styles are the red duck at the end of Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared 6, the duck from episode 1, and the duck from every other appearance from episode 2 on. The episode 1 duck is the only beak that's actually made with fabric, so I pretty much decided to do a hybrid between all 3 just to get a more recognizable look. To my surprise, how you actually shape the beak really makes or breaks whether your puppet looks right in the end. So make sure you have lots of references pulled up and get this as close as possible if you want yours to look authentic. I apologize in advance if you notice the beak changing in shape and size throughout the rest of the tutorial because I went back and had to change mine a few times since I originally did it without reference. The next step is to attach the felt to the beak. Once you have both of your beak halves cut, you're going to want to take your felt and stretch it around the shape of the beak for when you glue it on. Next, cover your stretched felt with either spray adhesive or hot glue and attach it to the beak. After this, go back through with a hot glue gun to make sure that it's securely attached around all the edges. Next, make sure to cut away all of the excess fabric. Next, put on the bottom portion of the felt and cut around it to fit the shape of the beak. This isn't necessary and you could skip just straight to putting on the inside of the mouth, but it does give you a firmer, thicker grip for actually using the puppet. And of course, repeat this process for the bottom half of the beak as well. Also, if you want your puppet to look more accurate to the first episode version, go back in with a thin strip of felt and put it around the top half of the beak as a lip. So the next step is to go ahead and make the tongue. If you want your duck to be accurate to the first episode duck, you will not need a tongue because it does not have one. If you want your duck to look more like the second episode and on puppet, you need a small pale pink piece of felt and you will cut it and attach it to the bottom half of the beak. The tongue is actually a part where I made a mistake in my own puppet. This is not just because the color is severely off, but I accidentally attached it to the middle of the beak. I was convinced that the tongue floated like this because I saw that's how the yellow guy's tongue did in the first episode. So this is really just another example on why you should really use references while you make this. Another mistake I initially made was not extending the inside of the mouth to the edge of the beak. It's really crucial that you do this or else it really messes up the whole look of the puppet. So after you have the beak completed with your choice of tongue or not, now it's time to cut a hole into the fur on top of the hole that you made into the paper mache so you could access your beak after you glue it on. Now is also a good time to cut the hole in the bottom for your hand to go in. After cutting a hole in the fur where the face is, go back in under the fur and attach the surrounding fur to the parameter of the paper mache hole to make sure that your beak doesn't droop after you glue it on. The next step is to basically just cover around the back of the outside of the beak with hot glue and stick it to the head. So after you're done with that, the next step is to move on to the eyes. Take one of your styrofoam balls and cut it equally in half with your knife. These two halves will serve as your eyes. You may want to cut them down a little smaller depending on how large you made the beak. The size of the eyes as well as the placement is a crucial part of making your puppet look accurate to the original. Next, take your white felt and push one of your styrofoam halves into it to stretch it out and make a divot. This way you can ensure that once you glue it on, you'll have no seams or creases to cut off. Now fill the divot with hot glue and glue in your eye. I prefer to do this part with hot glue instead of spray adhesive because it's a small enough area and it sticks it down better. After you do that, just make sure to cut away all the excess felt and get a nice round shape going around the styrofoam. The next step is to cut 2 pupils out of the black felt. Rather than doubling up the felt and cutting both at once, cut each individually. This way you can ensure that your cut will be nice and round. Before you attach the pupils, glue the eyeballs to the head. This way you could get the pupils in the exact placement that you want them. The last and final step is to take a spare piece of the fur fabric and shape it into the eyebrow. You could just glue this right onto the top of the head because the fur does a good job of hiding the seams. Now your puppet head is complete. Overall, this project required a lot of going back and tweaking things to make it look as good as possible. In the end, in a side-by-side comparison with the actual puppet, I think it came out pretty good. Other than the obvious difference in the color, the proportions, size, and shapes are pretty accurate. If I could go back and change anything, I would make the beak a bit more wider set and just increase the size of everything altogether. I hope that you all enjoyed this tutorial and that it proves to be helpful. If you liked this video, make sure to remember to leave a like. And if you want to see more puppet build tutorials or any other Don't Hug Me I'm Scared related content, subscribe and leave a comment down below letting me know what you'd like to see. If you would like to support me and this channel, make sure to check out the Patreon link at the top of the description. And if you do manage to follow this tutorial and make your own, make sure that you tag me on Instagram or Twitter so I could see. Thank you for watching.